Hello, this is Brian.
And this is Stephanie.
Welcome to the making and the remaking of a codependent mind.
The holiday edition. This is released the day after Christmas.
Merry Christmas to those who celebrate.
And happy Boxing Day.
Oh, that's right.
It's Boxing Day in the British Commonwealth, where you're supposed to box up leftovers and take them to the needy. Although nowadays it's about shopping.
Yeah, right. I know pretty much all the holidays.
The post-Christmas sales. But, kind of in the spirit of that original Boxing Day holiday, our topic for today is gratitude.
And gratitude, it's a topic that comes up a lot in the therapy circles, I think. It has throughout my life and the various times I've done therapy. And it's been a really interesting topic for us to explore.
It's different, obviously, from the one we just did, money, and the ones we did before that, which is truth-telling and lying. In that truth-telling and lying were behaviors, money was a resource in the world, and gratitude is an emotion. And I'm not sure that we've maybe talked enough about what that means for emotions to be tools. So throughout the podcast and in the book, we've talked about emotions as signals, as information sources, and how you needed to learn how to receive those signals.
Yeah, interpret them, what they were for, because I was feeling them even when I didn't understand them. So
this is going to be kind of extending that a little bit in terms of the functionality of emotions, which again, we've talked about a little bit, but say for instance, for anger, where anger is useful, functionally useful to motivate oneself to take action against injustice, for instance.
Right. And that made me realize that most of the focus that I was putting when I was thinking about emotions and how to read them and use them was on the painful or the negative ones. Because those ones just it seemed like more urgent. What was causing me to behave codependently and things like that? Well, it was fear, it was anger, it was resentment, it was shame. So I had to learn how to interpret those and what to do when I felt them. But I was also throwing out, if you want to call it that, the positive emotions in the same way. I wasn't really interpreting those and knowing how to use those.
So we've said in this season, tools are not good or bad. And we've said in the past as well, emotions are not good or bad. So similar in that way. They're morally neutral. So with emotions and with tools, it's about what effect they have in the world. So they're not good or bad in kind of sort of moral sense. But, we've been making this distinction for emotions between pleasurable emotions and painful emotions. And in terms of tools, between productive uses of tools and destructive uses of tools.
So the same tool being used for something productive or destructive.
Right. So the thing about gratitude that we want to kind of hammer home in this episode is gratitude is on the pleasurable side of that equation. Gratitude is pleasurable.
Yes, tuning into gratitude feels good.
And we talked a lot in last episode, in the money episode, about needing to solve the problems of being alive. The biggest one being about staying alive. But part of that problem of staying alive is the problem of wanting to stay alive. So all of us we wake up every day and it's kind of like we need a reason to keep going. And if you think, again, in evolutionary terms, it makes sense that the people who were more motivated to stay alive would be better at staying alive. And so we need pleasure. The pleasurable emotions fuel us and give us this sense of desire for living.
Yeah, they provide motivations. And just like we've talked about with the painful ones being animating, so anger animating, fear animating you, but the pleasurable ones too, being like, I think of like food tasting good, being an animating force to eat because we need to eat.
So gratitude isn't good or bad. It is pleasurable. But there is a lot of moralizing around gratitude. We seem to want to do that, to treat certain emotions as good and other emotions as bad to feel. And in that moralizing comes this should language. You should be grateful. And we get those messages. Some of us got a lot of those messages from very early on, from, say, our religious communities, from our parents, and from our wider community.
a common one I got, and I've heard a lot of people get, is say not eating your food at the table and getting the line from the parents like, well, there's starving children in Africa, so you should be grateful that you even have food. And so that's somehow going to make the kid want to eat.
I didn't grow up in a religious tradition, but I imagine a lot of people can think of those types of messages that they would get from their religion as well.
Right. I did. Grew up Christian. And so it was like, well, be grateful that Jesus died for you, being a huge one. Right?
Oh, that's the big one, right? And everything that follows from that.
Right.
I think what unfortunately happens is that what that can produce is almost a kind of negative feeling around gratitude, because you are expected to perform acts of gratitude. We titled this episode Gratitude because we want to talk about the feeling. We didn't title it Being Grateful. We want to avoid gratitude theater.
Yes.
We want to avoid advocating for the performance of gratitude as if that's the tool, that all you have to do is perform gratefulness.
Yeah, and we've talked about this word performance so much. It's become such a huge thing for me when it comes to thinking about my codependent behaviors and inauthenticity of them. And gratitude fell right along in those lines where I used gratitude at various times throughout my life because I was told this was going to be helpful somehow. So then I just did this activity that I was told to do, which is a total performance of gratitude.
Well, I'm sure even as a child, when you were told to be grateful that you had food.
Yes.
You performed that by eating food that
by
you
eating
didn't
the
like.
food.
Not that moved you in some way, like you felt connected to these starving children in Africa, but that you understood that this performance of gratitude was going to be expected of you, just like you had to perform in a number of ways. And I think you're right; it's very tied to codependent behaviors and inauthenticity, the performance of feelings rather than the feelings of feelings.
Right. So the feelings aren't what's driving the behavior. It's these shoulds.
This kind of ties into how gratitude can be destructive, because you think, well, it's a pleasurable feeling. Shouldn't it be a productive tool? And it is, for sure. But there are some ways it can have negative effects as well. And that is connected to it when you move into the gratitude theater, when you move into the performance of gratitude rather than feeling of gratitude. So we've talked about kind of two ways in which gratitude can have destructive effects on your life. The first one being not recognizing the kind of tool it is. So some of the tools that we've talked about, empathy, truth, line, these we would characterize as power tools. Mm-hmm. These can do some serious work, both productive work and destructive work in your relationships and in your life. Gratitude is not a power tool. It's more of a finesse tool, right? It's not like a chainsaw. It's more like a chisel. And so I think one way that it can produce negative effects in your life and in your relationships is if you expect it to act like a power tool. You're
trying to make it do more than it can do. This is going to change my feelings, basically, rather than, again, leading from the feelings, starting from the feelings. You're like, I'm going to make a list of gratitudes and it's going to somehow change the way I feel, change my whole life.
So you have an example of this. We recently found a gratitudes list.
Yeah, I love this. It's sources of shame, but also nuggets of gold, because this is an old gratitude list that I made only like maybe a quarter of the way through the relationship with R, the first of the two toxic relationships that we talked about. And this was exactly that. I have no memory of making the list or why I made the list at all.
That to me is one interesting thing, mm-hmm. because obviously memory is really super complex, yeah. But one way memories get imprinted or don't get imprinted is if they have emotional content. So we remember events and experiences that affect us emotionally a lot better than we do ones that don't. So here you making this gratitude list, which should be a very emotional experience as you contemplate your whole life and the things in it you are grateful. And not only do you not remember what was on it, you didn't remember what was on it, you had no memory of the list, and you still have no memory of making the list.
No, I still have no memory. So I figured out when I made the list simply because of what's on it. Like, oh, this was during that period because of certain things that were on it.
And let's talk about the things that were on it, because it was a list of 131 things. This is a long list.
So, which makes me think about how I approach this. And I think a lot of people just make a list of everything you can think of that you're grateful of. And so I'm thinking, again, I'm not leading with the actual feeling of gratitude. I've likened this to making a packing list or whatever. I'm just thinking about my house or I'm thinking about my life or something. What's in it? That. I'm just listing everything in my life. It's just making a list.
So you included R and spending time with R.
Right. I put her first.
You put her first and multiple times through that.
Yes. Yeah. Different aspects. Right. Spending time with R. Yeah.
Even though by then it was pretty rough.
Right.
But I mean, there's also like Amazon.
Yeah.
Your
my iPhone, my laptop.
Netflix.
So yeah, I didn't actually have gratitude for these things. It's just a big giant list of things in my life, and then I moved on and never used it again. And except for it looks like at the very end, I have add to list, and then I have 3 more things. So like maybe I tried to open up the list at some point and went, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be thinking of this on a daily basis, a regular basis.
So it's a little hard to, obviously, since you have no memory of it, to reconstruct what was the motivation, but it seems likely that it was some sort of should. Maybe you got it from a book. You weren't in therapy at that point, but...
No, I wasn't, but I did read some books at the time, relationship books.
And this can be a common therapeutic device, make a gratitude list. But again, you were already struggling in your life and in your relationship. A list is not going to pull you out of that. And in fact, what it did the opposite. It helped you disguise the exact problems that you should have been addressing.
Yes, exactly. So a big thing that I did all throughout alongside compartmentalization was rationalization. And I feel like this is a tool for rationalization for me. It was. Because, oh, look, like not only should I be grateful for all these things, like look at how many there are. Like this is so much. It's kind of like there's starving kids in Africa. You should eat your food. Oh, I have a roof over my head. I have food on the table. Being just grateful for just all these random things.
The main point being the emotions that were actually present in your life. You were struggling. You had depression. You had anxiety. And you were trying to use this chisel to reconstruct your whole life, where you needed a power tool. You needed to take a chainsaw to your life. You just didn't need to be reminded of that you had an iPhone.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That leads us to the second problem and the ways in which gratitude and the use of gratitude can be destructive is because if you're shoulding yourself and it's not having the effect that it should have, double should, then that's a pathway to shame. And then, so there was a second gratitude exercise that you did that makes the shame part even more obvious. And also, even though this was closer to the present, you still have very few memories of doing this as well.
Right. And it was, luckily it was with Jay this time. So I have an instance of doing this gratitude theater in both of those relationships. And this one happened somewhere about halfway through. All I remember is getting the idea on Facebook of, you should have all year long, you should have a jar. And every time something great happens, something that some nice moment between you and your partner, write it down on a little piece of paper and drop it in the jar. And then at the end of the year, on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, dump out the jar and read all these wonderful things and feel great about each other. And there was like a little video with it, and they showed the couple, reading these things and laughing and embracing. And I'm like, well, that sounds nice.
And you have a very vivid memory of that.
Yes.
So there was an emotional reaction to that.
And then the memories end from there until I get to shame, being the jar sitting there for over a year and a half, with maybe 5 pieces of paper in it.
So you don't remember actually talking about it with Jay. You don't remember her reaction. You don't even remember putting the things in.
No, I mean, I have just vague memories of what a couple of the things were, or basically the theme of the 5 pieces of paper or whatever that I put in there was laughed while playing this game, or laughed while doing this. Like, okay, all right, that's nice. Feels good to laugh, but that's it. I came up with 5 things. She came up with 2, I think, in the course of this year and a half of the jar sitting there. But yeah, I have no recollection of bringing it up as an idea, because it sounds like a great idea, But yeah, put this jar on the counter, and there it stayed. And there it was in the kitchen, where every day I went in to cook, and which I didn't feel grateful for having to do, actually. I felt very resentful for that. And I'm going in and I'm seeing this jar with almost nothing in it, sitting there month after month after month.
And so then your first kind of memory around the jar is...
So I there were some people that started coming over to my house on a regular basis near the end of that relationship. We've talked about that before. It was kind of what helped me get out of it. And a friend commented on the jar. It's like, what's that? And I just was like, trying to dismiss it. Sort of just, well, it was just this idea, it wasn't that great. Yeah, obviously we didn't really use it. I kind of didn't want to talk about it really because it's just embarrassing. And then that just, okay, it's time to get rid of this jar, because the whole time I think was unconsciously feeling the shame, but then also the act of getting rid of the jar would have felt shameful to me.
Acknowledging that it was a bust, and that
it was a bust,
that you and Jay did not have a relationship and that was abundant with things to be grateful for.
And that's the signal I was getting, but I didn't want to get that signal. I didn't want to believe that signal that basically I have nothing to be grateful for in this relationship. And this is proof. This is empty jar sitting on the counter for a year and a half.
Just a little shame hit every time you come to the kitchen.
Yeah.
The empty jar. That would be a good name for a book.
Then the only other memory I have is like just mentioning to Jay, like, oh, okay, let's get rid of this jar. Let's just dump it out. Barely remember that though too. And this is, not even that long ago. I mean, at this point it is.
So shame. And then of course shame motivates you to do the opposite of what you should be doing, is looking at your life honestly and reflecting on things you should be grateful for, things you should not be grateful for.
Yeah, because my main goal was to just avoid shame. Anytime I felt it, I didn't use it as a signal. Just like I didn't use gratitude as a signal, but I didn't feel gratitude in those days. I felt depressed. And then I thought I just had depression, so I needed to do these activities. This is how I was going to not be depressed, by making a list of gratitudes. That'll work. Like you said, power tool.
If you try to use it as a power tool, it's not going to transform your life. And unfortunately slip into kind of almost a bludgeon, where it's used to bludgeon people with shame. It's like, well, you should be grateful. So what we're talking about, like we said, is the feeling, not the behaviors. And there are no shoulds in feelings. You feel what you feel.
Yes, right.
No one gets to tell you what you should feel. Feelings, emotions are information about your world, including your internal world. They help you navigate your world successfully. So you don't take information from the world to decide what you feel. You take what you feel and make decisions about how to behave in the world.
So if you don't feel grateful, then you don't feel grateful.
And there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with not feeling grateful. There's nothing wrong with feeling one thing or another thing. That's just that's information. But like we're saying, gratitude feels good.
It does.
So you can use that as well in your life.
So when you actually feel it, that's when you use it. That's how it's a tool. So it's a signal, just like anger is a signal, fear is a signal, gratitude is a signal that you have something that you want to appreciate, that you do appreciate. And it's good to be aware of that.
And also, again, it's pleasurable.
Yeah.
It feels good. And you can use good feelings to counteract bad feelings.
That's true. That's also true.
Like, we're not saying that you just have to accept the signal and the information. No, you can have a dialogue with your feelings.
A dialogue, exactly. Yes.
So I have an example, because we've been talking about gratitude, obviously, to prepare for this episode. And I was in traffic recently, and I'm hardly ever in traffic because we both work from home and we live in a city that you don't need to drive. But I was in traffic and I was getting frustrated and a little angry and a little resentful of people's behavior. And that those are all uncomfortable feelings. Those are all painful feelings. So I remembered our discussions about gratitude, and I decided to kind of take a moment and be more aware of the fact that I almost am never in traffic. And just that awareness already moved me away from the anger and the resentment into gratitude. And then kind of looking at all the other people in traffic and realizing this is probably their daily experience, that they have to do this. Then I was full on grateful that this was just happening to me, like, maybe once a month I have to be in traffic. And I felt grateful, and meaning I felt better because it feels good to be grateful. Then I feel good and satisfied with my life. So again, you don't have to take all feelings as they come, right? I'm feeling anger, resentment. The signal is traffic sucks, but I've already arranged my life so that I don't have to be in it very much. And I can be grateful for that my life experiences have allowed me not to be in traffic. So if it was the case where I did have to be in traffic every day and I was angry and resentful every day, then probably I would need a more powerful tool.
Yes, yeah.
Because that's not healthy, right? That's not good.
That's going to be a signal that you need to do something else, probably.
Yeah, I need to rearrange my life. But I have rearranged my life to avoid that. Not always, but gratitude was very useful in that situation, just to change my perspective and to move me into a place where I felt emotionally calm.
I think that's a great story because that does show how that can work. That this what we're talking about, the starving kids of Africa, kind of thing, where it can work if you actually do feel the gratitude. So if you tried to do that exercise and it didn't work, then it didn't work. Then again, there's nothing wrong with you. It's not. You should be grateful. So what is the feeling, though? Before we get too far, like this pleasurable feeling of gratitude. Right. There's satisfaction that comes with it. There's appreciation. And these are of external sources. Well, in that you don't control them. I mean, they can be internal, like you can appreciate your health or, right? Oh, sure. But you don't have control over that. Right. Yeah. So this this sense of happiness and pleasure for someone or something that has happened to you. Right. As opposed to like, say, I'm grateful for this book I wrote or something. That's pride or sense of accomplishment or something like that, but not necessarily gratitude. Yes, because you're not going to say get gratitude from narcissists, because everything good in their life they're entitled to and stems from them and their superiority. But most of us need to recognize that there are a lot of forces outside of our control, including other people. Our forces are outside of our control. And so them being in our lives, or things being in our lives, resources being in our lives, the natural world being in our lives, these are all things that we can be grateful for. The problem being, the way we've often talked about how narcissists and codependents kind of bookend each other. Yes. Narcissists more inclined to not be grateful for anything because, again, they feel entitled to everything. But then the codependents, I think, they need to be particularly careful not to get swept up in this gratitude theater where they have to be grateful even though they're suffering. Yeah, because of the powerlessness that went with it. If it's being grateful for things that you have no control over, I didn't have control over anything. So I all right, you tell me I have to be grateful for something, I'll be grateful for it. I'm not necessarily feeling that gratitude, but... And in fact, you're suffering. But instead of recognizing your suffering, you decide that all you need to do is perform these acts of gratitude. So yeah, it's this feeling of happiness that I've used repeatedly to do versions of what I just described, is counteract negative feelings. For instance, if I'm throwing myself a pity party, which I have done occasionally in my life, although that doesn't really feel good when you get in this kind of self-pity spiral. And one way to get out of it is to, again, change my perspective, start to think about the things that I appreciate, and then I start to feel gratitude, which feels good. Yeah. It's this sense of, like we're talking about, this kind of happiness for, appreciation for. And there's a couple more gratitude lists we want to talk about. One being that I made during an early difficult period in our relationship, kind of explicitly for that reason, because we were having a lot of bad feelings. You were feeling a lot of shame and regret, and I was feeling a lot of hurt and anger, but there was still so much about you that I loved and appreciated and was grateful for, and I was still very grateful to have you in my life. So I wrote a list of those things. I wrote a list of things that I loved about you to remind myself and you that there was so much still between us to be grateful for, even when these bad feelings came up. And this was so early on that it was before I did any of this work, really. I was trying to get started on it, but I didn't really understand how to read and use my emotions at the time. So it felt very good reading yours because I believed it, and you conveyed it in a way that I could tell was coming from your feelings, but I didn't understand it that way at the time. So then I tried to do the same thing. I took it on as, oh, okay, time to perform. I need to make a list too. But then, unlike yours, which was like very kind of detailed, like it wasn't a list of like 80 different things. Well, let's read a few things from both of the lists, because it's kind of funny, the contrast. So a few of them for mine were and are how open, receptive, and responsive he is to affection and connection, how he is serious about things without taking things too seriously, his persistence, his creativity, his sparkly blue eyes full of good humor and wit and intelligence.
So that's part of my list.
Yeah. So some of the things on my list were self-awareness, good communicator, good listener, good cook.
It read like I was at a job interview.
Yes, that's
Like,
right. Well, like where you would put on a resume.
And I wasn't that great at candidate. She's like,
Yeah,
she's a
right.
good cook. She's a good communicator. Check.
Yeah, right.
It was almost like this little checklists of.
Oh yeah, like so ones that would be like from a resume, like considerate of other people, low stress level,
Yeah.
patient.
So,
Yeah,
patient, right?
Just yeah.
So still, as you were saying, still having trouble with emotional content.
Well, this is right around the time we've talked about this in an earlier episode. Around the time I made a list of reasons to move in together. Like you were
Right.
kind of doing the same thing. Like let's think about, and you were asking for an emotional processing of it.
Let's think about how we feel
Yes.
about moving in, not whether logistically it's a.
And that
a
just
good
didn't
idea.
compute to me because that's not what I did. I just that was not something that was in my toolbox at the time. I didn't know how to emotionally think of things. So it was the same sort of thing. I made a list of like, it makes financial sense. The timing is good. Yes, our leases are about to end. Just like things.
But having now reconnected with your emotion, I would say that gratitude and the practice of gratitude, not gratitude theater, but taking the time to both cultivate and be aware of our feelings of gratitude happens a lot in our relationship.
And this is something that I could see we've been doing this for a while, and it wasn't something that we were told to do or something. It was just something that we'd be sitting in the evening when we like to sit and talk for an hour, 2 hours, and it would just come up. It was just one of us or both of us would just start recognizing how we were feeling great about each other, about our relationship, our situation, and then we just talk about it.
How lucky we feel, how grateful we are to each other and to the universe for bringing us together.
And it feels good. It brings us together. It strengthens our connection when we do that.
It's definitely a tool for strengthening our connection, and it's a way to remind ourselves and each other what we like about each other, remind ourselves what we each bring into each other's lives. So, it also kind of maintains this awareness of the other, that this is another person. I think it helps me to not take you for granted because you could not be here. And I remember when you were not here. And I understand the ways in which my life is so much richer. And so I'm grateful. And it feels good. It reminds me that I'm happy.
And communicating that with each other is a really great relationship tool. So it's a great individual tool for doing, like you said, in the traffic example. It's a great thing to do to just make yourself feel good. It's often when sometimes you may not feel good in a moment about something. But then as a relationship tool, being able to communicate this out loud on a regular basis to each other. If you actually feel something, communicate it. That's something that I've been learning to do. Because for the longest time in our relationship, I was learning how to feel things, but I wouldn't say it out loud. And that's not helping you any. That's not helping the relationship any. So keeping this in mind, the you, me, and us, the three elements. How do I help you? How do I help us? Not just help myself by feeling gratitude in my head and going, that's nice.
But it isn't a power tool. We do want to go back to that for a minute. And we recently had, I guess, not really an argument, but like definitely a disconnection where we actually, I guess, retreated to very similar emotions. I was feeling hurt and I guess resentful and a little bit angry, and you were feeling some amount of shame.
I was feeling mostly shame, and I've been dealing with shame for a long time now, but it's not a good emotion, and it's
painful.
It's hard to navigate sometimes.
Again, this was during this period when we were talking about gratitude. I remember thinking, I'm not feeling gratitude right now, and it's not going to cut it. Like I need more than just to be reminded that I love Brian and I love him in my life. That's not going to get me past my current feelings of feeling hurt and angry. Not a cure-all for sure. And I think it's probably is best thought of as this kind of finesse tool, which is how I think we use it regularly, just to make small refinements.
Right, because it's a great connection tool, but yeah, it's not so much a repair or a reconnection.
Yeah, or reconstruction, right?
Yeah, reconstruction.
You're not going to rebuild your whole relationship if it's seriously flawed around just picking out things to be grateful for.
But it can do a lot in the long run if it is used regularly, because I think it does. I mean, I can feel it because it's at the top of my mind a lot of time because we use it so often. So it really does add to that strength of
the
the
strength
connection.
of our connection, those feelings of love and affection that we have for each other.
Right, because not tuning into that could just lead to taking each other for granted and disconnection. So we hope you find ways to lean into the things that you're grateful for too.
And it's okay if you struggle to find some.
Yeah.
Some people might be not in great spaces and places in their life. And there's no shame in not being able to access your gratitude. But hopefully that pleasure is available to most of you.
We're grateful for all of you who listen and engage.
We are, it's true. Very grateful and appreciative of your time and your attention.
And we'll see you in the new year with another topic.